Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
That was Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving announcing the arrival of President Barack Obama, his 6th State of the Union address on Tuesday night. And the president entered Congress to 4 minutes of applause, handshakes, and kisses. And then House Speaker John Boehner dropped the gavel and started the ceremonies.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
A big round of applause right there. Nicole, I remember your boss, George W. Bush, would try to hurry right to that text at this moment.
Yeah, we'd work so hard on those applause lines, and he'd try to talk right through them so that he could, not drag it out. But some people like it more than others.
President Clinton enjoyed it. He enjoyed it.
He did.
But this is such a moment.
Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans. We are 15 years into this new century. 15 years that dawned with terror touching our shores, that unfolded with a new generation fighting 2 long and costly wars, that saw a vicious recession spread across our nation and the world. It has been and still is a hard time for many.
From that point on, it was a deluge of applause and standing ovations, predominantly from the left side of the aisle. But as promised, the president didn't hold back. He didn't apologize or try to defend any faults or failures. Instead, the 2015 State of the Union address was all about taking the credit for all of America's successes and conveniently ignoring all of America's failures. However, this speech did set the tone for what is sure to be one of the most interesting years that we've seen on Capitol Hill in quite a long time. Well, only 14 words into the president's speech, and he dropped the T word, terror. We heard some reference to terrorism or Islamic violence at least 15 different times, including right out of the gate. Starting out his 90-minute, 6,500-word message telling Americans to view his presidency through the lens of terrorism.
My fellow Americans, we are 15 years into this new century. 15 years that dawned with terror touching our shores, that unfolded with a new generation fighting 2 long and costly wars. We turn the page. Tonight, after a breakthrough year for America, our economy is growing and creating jobs at the fastest pace since 1999.
Almost immediately, the president launched into a bevy of economic numbers crafted by the White House. But Associated Press reporter Calvin Woodward says President Obama's claims just aren't telling the whole story.
We haven't risen from the recession quite as robustly as he implied in his speech. I mean, you know, there's good news for sure on unemployment, on job growth. But the fact is that a lot of those jobs aren't good-paying jobs. And I think probably most notably, household income is not caught up with, you know, where it was before the recession hit.
President Obama made several other optimistic claims in his State of the Union address, and we'll dig into some of those more later this hour. In another announcement, one that we've all seen coming for some time now, the president announced his plan to provide free community college to anyone who can manage to earn a C on their report card.
And that's why I'm sending this Congress a bold new plan to lower the cost of community college to zero.
The issue here is the community colleges obviously aren't offering free classes for zero money. Somebody has to pay for that, and President Obama's plan would put another $60 billion on the back of the American taxpayer over the course of the next 10 years. Obama's proposal also forces each individual state to foot a quarter of the bill, and that's a budget breaker that could get dozens of governors fired as well. Most financial analysts agree that this plan sounds good to the student and to the parents who would have to pay the bill until they realize that they're paying for it in a roundabout form. This is just one more battle taking shape on Capitol Hill. The political posturing is out of the way, and President Obama did his best to paint his opposition into a corner. Now, the Republicans are looking for the best way to respond without burying themselves in that nasty phrase that we've all heard so much in recent years, government gridlock. Another area where Republicans and Democrats largely disagree, climate change. President Obama touched all of the bases on Tuesday night. Last week, he promised that he would go on the offensive, and you can mark that down as a promise he fulfilled.
No challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change.
The president delivering some strong remarks on global warming. He calls that a more pressing threat than terrorism, Ebola, economic disaster, or global war. This is one of the hardest sells the president would have to make in his speech, as greater than 90% of all Americans don't share that same view.
And if we don't act forcefully, we'll continue to see rising oceans, longer, hotter heat waves, dangerous droughts and floods, and massive disruptions that can trigger greater migration and conflict and hunger around the globe. The Pentagon says that climate change poses immediate risks to our national security. We should act like it.
The president doing his best to invoke a sense of fear or global disaster to influence change in politics. Some of the most heated debates that we've seen in Congress are over this issue of climate change, and there's a lot of money involved, and we'll cover that throughout the year at greater lengths. But in the short term, President Obama is promising once again to use his veto powers to block Congress when it comes to the EPA.
I will not let this Congress endanger the health of our children by turning back the clock on our efforts.
New details emerge from AirAsia Flight 8501. Indonesian officials have released information regarding the last few minutes of the fatal airliner. Transport Minister Ignatius Jonan said that the plane was climbing much faster than normal.
I think it's rare for a fighter plane to increase its flight level at 6,000 feet per minute. For a commercial flight to climb 1,000 to 2,000 feet is a tremendous amount because it's not designed to be able to rise so rapidly.
Although some of the initial findings of the crash will be announced, government officials say the full preliminary report will not be released. The chairman of the National Transportation Safety Committee says that the preliminary report will not be exposed to the public. This is for the consumption of those countries that are involved. It is not clear how much information will be exposed regarding the crash, but the final report isn't due for another year. Surfing fans are in shock after 24-year-old pro surfer Ricardo dos Santos was shot dead. The popular Brazilian surfer was shot 3 times after he confronted an off-duty police officer and another man outside of his home. Santos was reportedly arguing with the men when shots were fired. Santos underwent 4 surgeries after being shot before he passed away. He was well known for beating the 11-time world champion surfer Kelly Slater in a 2012 event. Slater called his passing a truly senseless loss of life. The officer involved in the shooting has been detained but has yet to be charged. He is claiming self-defense against Santos. Conflicting reports have caused a tough time for investigators. Heartwarming news out of China as a man is reunited with his biological father after 24 years. Soon Bin was only 4 years old when traffickers kidnapped him from his hometown. Bin was sold into another family who told him he was adopted. As he became an adult, he worked towards finding his real parents. Bin went to a police station and left a DNA sample, hoping to find a match. To his surprise, a response came quick. Father and son finally reunited after 24 years. 28-year-old Soon Bin dropped to his knees in tears. His father said that, "I was happy, I was grateful, but I was also bitter." Bin has yet to make a decision of whether or not he will move in with his father permanently. The trafficking of young boys continues to be a big problem in China. There's a high demand for boys since they continue a family line and are in high demand. Newborn boys in China can be illegally sold for up to $13,000 each.